The year was 2500. Humanity had conquered disease-colonized Mars and even established outposts in the distant reaches of our solar system. But in the vast cosmic hierarchy, Earth remained insignificant. For millennia, intelligent life across the universe had cultivated. Spiral, the coiled energy core within their bodies that served as the foundation for all cultivation. It allowed them to absorb, store, and channel immense power. Transcending physical limitations, races were ranked based on their spiral potential. Humans, one of the rare species without spiral, were relegated to the lowest tier. Commander Gale Arden stood at the observation deck of Earth's last coastal fortress, his broad shoulders tense as he studied the holographic displays. 3 years had passed since the first abyssal emergence, when vast creatures from the deepest ocean trenches had surged to the surface and laid waste to coastal cities. Initially dismissed as a natural disaster, the truth had quickly become apparent. Earth was under systematic attack. Movement in Eastern Quadrant, reported Lieutenant Quan, her voice tight. Biosignatures match war-class Abyssals. The fortress shuddered as defensive systems engaged automatically. In the adjacent command chamber, other human cultivators supervised different defensive sectors. A handful of cultivators at Hyperbody Initiate led teams of lower-level fighters. They're still developing spiral energies, barely visible beneath their skin. On monitoring screens, Jax could see reports of cultivators from Boneborn through Fleshforge engaged against Scout-class Abyssals across various evacuation zones. Gale didn't flinch. At 43, his weathered face betrayed nothing but the energy flowing through his body. Pulsed. Visibly, beneath his skin, a luminescent blue current following his veins. He was humanity's pioneer and greatest champion. The first to awaken a spiral core when the abyssal invasion began 3 years ago, and now the only one to reach Hyperbody Apex. While other human cultivators had emerged in his wake, some even reaching Hyperbody. At its initiate stage, none had matched Gale's unprecedented advancement to the peak of the 5th level. His DNA had been the first to transform during the early battles, activating the internal cultivation core that humans had never possessed before. Through relentless combat against overwhelming odds, countless near-death experiences, and a determination that defied logic, he had rapidly ascended the cultivation ladder, becoming humanity's vanguard against realm-superior threats. "Alert the evacuation teams," Gale ordered. "Clear the shoreline back 3 kilometers." "Sir," Quan hesitated. "Intel suggests it's not just War Class and Scout Class this time." The hologram shifted, displaying a massive form moving beneath the others. Larger, more complex in structure than even the Choir-class commanders they'd encountered before. The data streams beside it showed energy readings that exceeded their measurement capabilities. Vorr'zhul. Gale whispered the name like a curse. The Abyssal Supreme Commander had been merely a theory until now. The tactical mind behind the coordinated attacks. Confirmation of his existence meant their enemy was far more organized than previously believed. Gale reached for Stormpiercer, the ancient spear that had become his signature weapon. The weapon hummed with latent energy as his fingers wrapped around its shaft. According to legend, it had been forged from the lightning core of a dead planet. Each thrust could generate shockwaves capable of tearing through the atmosphere itself. The spear had responded to his awakened spiral bonding with him in ways military scientists still couldn't explain. The waters beyond the barrier reef churned violently. Scout-class Abyssals, sleek fast with bodies like nightmarish dolphins, leaped above the surface in coordinated formations, their skin pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that disrupted electronic defenses. These Level 122 entities served as the invasion's reconnaissance force. Behind them, the massive war-class beasts emerged, 15 meters of armored exoskeleton with blade-like protrusions capable of cutting through reinforced concrete. At level 3-4, they formed the bulk of the assault force. Their movements synchronized, methodical, nothing like the mindless destroyers humanity had initially believed them to be. Most concerning were the Choir-class commanders' level 5 entities that coordinated the attack patterns through subsonic communications. Their elongated frames pulsed with concentrated spiral energy, each one capable of matching a human hyperbody cultivator. "Sir," Quan's voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Population centers aren't fully evacuated. We need more time." Gale removed his command jacket and handed it to her. "Then we'll buy us some, Commander, even with our hyperbody cultivators." "I know." Gale nodded toward the command center, where the other high-level human fighters were gathering 12 of them, all who had achieved hyperbody in the months since spiral awakening began on Earth. None had reached Apex like him, but together they formed humanity's elite defense force. Stormhawk Squadron will engage the Choir-class's Iron Vein Division, handles War-class containment. I'll take Vorr'zhul." As Gale stepped onto the launch platform, the energy in his body intensified. The blue current beneath his skin brightened, coalescing around his spine, and major muscle group Stormpiercer pulsed in response, its metal surface rippling with the same energy. This was the ultimate expression of hyperbody, the complete integration of spiral energy with physical form and weapon. It had taken him years of combat and training to achieve, but Gale's true advantage against the superior abyssal forces was his killing move, Stormcore Implosion, a technique that channeled his entire spiral reserve into Stormpiercer's tip, creating a momentary rupture in space that could penetrate even Mindtide-level defenses. The move had nearly killed him the first time he executed it, rupturing internal organs and leaving him comatose for weeks. Even now, using it meant days of recovery, but it was humanity's only trump card against higher realm beings. He leapt from the platform, his body accelerating far beyond human capabilities. The air resistance should have torn his skin apart, but his spiral-enhanced physique held firm as he rocketed toward the Abyssal front line. Stormpiercer extended before him, like the tip of a living lightning bolt. Behind him, the other hyperbody cultivators launched in formation. Stormhawk Squadron members trailing streams of energy as they targeted the Choir-class commanders, while Iron Vein divisions spread out to engage the War-class forces. The first scout class to reach him was impaled by Stormpiercer's gleaming point. The spear released a concentrated shockwave that shattered the creature from within. Gale withdrew the weapon in a fluid motion, using the momentum to propel himself toward the next target, creating a trail of destruction through their advanced scouts. From the deep, a deafening roar vibrated through the water and air, a sound so low and powerful it caused structural damage to buildings kilometers away. The true battle was about to begin. San Francisco Bay had become unrecognizable. Once iconic skyscrapers now stood partially submerged, their gleaming surfaces dulled by salt and destruction, though Golden Gate Bridge. Humanity's engineering pride had collapsed during the first wave of attacks, its twisted remains jutting from the water like skeletal fingers. Jax Carter watched the battle from a reinforced shelter, 20 blocks inland alongside hundreds of other civilians awaiting evacuation. At 18, he was too young to remember the city in its prime, but old enough to have lost everything to the Abyssals. His parents had died in the initial attacks 3 years ago. Their research facility targeted in what officials now recognized as a calculated strike against humanity's defense infrastructure. "They say Gale Arden is fighting them alone," whispered an older man beside Jax, his voice reverent. "One human against an army." Through the shelter's observation slits, Jax could see flashes of blue light erupting over the bay, each followed by shock waves that rattled the building's foundations. Even from this distance, the distinctive arc of Stormpiercer was visible as it cut through the air, trailing electricity and displaced atmosphere in its wake. Around the main battle site, multiple aerial engagements unfolded As humanity's cultivator teams fought the Abyssal forces, Stormhawk Squadron's hyperbody cultivators soared through the air, engaging the towering Choir-class commanders in synchronized patterns. Their coordinated attacks created geometric patterns of energy that periodically contained and damaged the Level 5 Abyssals. Meanwhile, Iron Vein Division members, a mix of hyperbody initiate and high-level Fleshforge cultivators, were dispersed around the harbor, intercepting war-class units before they could reach evacuation routes. In other sectors, different energy signatures marked where human cultivators of lower levels fought to hold back the invasion. Flashes of red from bone-born cultivators of the Crimson Guard, rippling purple from blood-morphed defenders of the Vein Shield Corps, and occasional bursts of green from those who had reached Marrow Shift. Together, they formed humanity's desperate defense against extinction. A massive form rose from the bay water, cascading from its gray-armored body. Unlike the other Abyssals, this one stood upright, its spine lined with what looked like resonance columns, black spines that pulsed with crimson energy, its eyes blood red and devoid of pupils swept across the shoreline. Vorr'zhul had arrived. Everyone moved to the transport level, ordered a security officer, urgency breaking through his professional demeanor. This area is no longer designated safe. The crowd began to file toward the underground passages, but Jax remained transfixed. Something about the creature's presence felt directed, purposeful. In the bay, Gale Arden landed on a partially submerged building, his body emanating power. Stormpiercer whirled in his grip, each movement leaving trails of ionized air. Even from this distance, Jax could see the commander's transformation muscles defined beyond human limits, skin gleaming with integrated energy eyes, burning with spiral-fueled determination. Hyperbody Apex, Jax whispered, recalling terms from classified reports he'd glimpsed during his parents' research. The peak of physical cultivation, where the body transcended normal human constraints. The Abyssal commander raised a massive clawed hand. The gesture seemed casual, almost dismissive, but the impact was devastating. A wave of concentrated force erupted outward, pulverizing concrete and steel in its path. Gale barely managed to evade his enhanced reflexes, carrying him to another perch, Stormpiercer, spinning defensively to disperse the remaining energy. Mindtide awakening. Jax realized with growing horror, the Abyssal wasn't just physically powerful. It was operating at level 6, using mental projections as weapons. Gale retaliated, but not with a simple attack. His expression hardened as he gripped Stormpiercer with both hands. The weapon began to emit a high-pitched wail as energy spiraled violently around its form. The air itself seemed to bend inward toward the spear's tip, the prelude to his killing move. Stormcore. Vorr'zhul's reaction was immediate. The Abyssal commander's attack pattern shifted from aggressive to defensive, its resonance columns flaring brighter as protective barriers manifested. "He's forced it back," whispered someone beside Jax. "Commander's going to use that technique." Gale drove Stormpiercer forward in a perfect thrust, his entire body becoming a conductor for the concentrated spiral energy. At the moment of release, space itself seemed to fold inward before exploding outward. The collision with Vorr'zhul's barriers created a shockwave that shattered every remaining window for kilometers. "Kid, move!" The security officer grabbed Jax's arm, pulling him toward the evacuation route. "The whole area's coming down." As if confirming the warning, a low-frequency pulse emerged from the battle site, traveling through solid matter. The shelter's infrastructure groaned, support beams visibly stressing beyond their capacity. "They're evenly matched," Jax protested as he was dragged away. "Gale is only hyperbody, but he's fighting a Mindtide creature." The officer gave him a strange look. "How would you know that terminology?" Before Jax could respond, the building's upper levels collapsed. Steel and concrete cascaded around them as the officer shoved Jax into a reinforced doorway. The last thing Jax saw before debris blocked his view was Gale Arden and Vorr'zhul locked in combat, neither giving ground, their clash generating ripples of destructive energy that expanded outward like tsunami waves. Stormpiercer's lightning-like discharges illuminated the scene in strobing flashes of blue against the Abyssals' crimson force fields. The shelter's emergency lighting flickered, then died. In the darkness, screams and the grind of shifting rubble created a symphony of chaos. Hours passed in darkness. Emergency systems had failed completely, leaving survivors trapped beneath layers of collapsed infrastructure. Rescue teams worked frantically. From outside, their progress slowed by continued seismic activity from the ongoing battle at the shoreline. Jax had been fortunate. The reinforced doorway had created a pocket that saved him from being crushed. The security officer beside him hadn't been as lucky. Jax sat in near-total darkness, conserving his energy and oxygen, waiting with the patience of someone who had survived catastrophe before. His thoughts drifted to his parents' research. They had been studying anomalous energy patterns in human subjects exposed to abyssal environments, seeking to understand why some people developed spiral cores while others didn't. Their final message to him had mentioned a breakthrough, something about dormant potentials and primordial configurations. They had died before sharing their full findings. A sudden shift in the rubble above sent dust raining down. Jax covered his mouth and nose with his shirt, pressing himself against the most stable wall. The vibrations continued, but with a pattern that seemed deliberate rather than random structural settling. "Hello," called a voice from above. "Life signs detected. Hang on." Relief flooded through Jax as rescue workers began clearing debris. It took another 40 minutes before they created an opening large enough to extract him. Hands reached down, pulling him up through jagged concrete and twisted metal. As Jax emerged into the gray daylight, he saw the extent of destruction. What had been a fortified evacuation center was now a crater of rubble. San Francisco's skyline had been erased, replaced by smoke plumes and the skeletal remains of buildings. "You're lucky, kid," said one of the rescue workers, a woman with haunted eyes. "This whole sector got hit with some kind of mental force wave. Liquefied concrete in some places." "What about Commander Arden, the Abyssals?" Jax asked, scanning the horizon. "Stalemate. Last we heard, Commander Arden and the Stormhawk Squadron forced a strategic retreat after Gale used his killing move. Storm Core implosion. It nearly tore a hole through Vorr'zhul's defenses, while our cultivators managed to take down 2 Choir-class commanders. The Abyssals backed off, but we lost 3 hyperbody cultivators from Iron Vein Division in the process." She pointed to a distant flash of light. "That's Stormpiercer's discharge pattern. The commander and the remaining squadron members are still fighting, keeping the remnant forces contained while we evacuate civilians to Sanctuary Basin. But they'll be running on fumes now that technique drains them completely." The legendary weapon's power was visible even from kilometers away, blue arcs of energy slicing through the haze of battle. How Gale maintained such output after hours of combat was beyond comprehension. Even with his Hyperbody Apex cultivation, sustaining that level of exertion should have been impossible. The worker guided Jax toward a hover transport. "Come on. We're moving all civilians to Sanctuary Basin. Its deep inland should be safer." As Jax stepped onto the transport platform, a sudden sharp pain lanced through his spine. He gasped, doubling over as heat seemed to spread outward from his core. The sensation lasted only seconds before fading, leaving him disoriented. "You injured the worker?" asked, concerned. "No, I'm fine." Jax straightened the strange heat already subsiding. He'd experienced similar episodes since his parents' death. Moments of unexplainable bodily response, always fleeting, always followed by a sense of expectation, as if his body was waiting for something. The transport lifted off, joining a steady stream of vessels carrying survivors inland. From this height, Jax could see the bay where the battle had taken place. The water was stained with bioluminescent fluids. Abyssal blood and military vessels now patrolled the perimeter. In the distance, flashes of blue energy marked Gale's position. Stormpiercer's distinctive energy signature, cutting through chaos like a beacon. "We're heading to Sanctuary Basin," the pilot announced over the intercom. "ETA 45 minutes. It's the largest inland shelter facility, converted from an old military research complex. You'll be safe there." Something had changed today. The attack pattern was different. Previous abyssal incursions had been sweeping and indiscriminate, but this one had targeted specific infrastructure with tactical precision. Vorr'zhul hadn't been trying to destroy everything he'd been testing. Arden, measuring humanity's defenses. Far beneath the city, unknown to anyone on the surface, an ancient structure resonated faintly. Deep in the earth, where no human had ventured for millennia, inscriptions carved into stone began to glow with subtle energy. A pattern of spiraling symbols awakened, responding to a signal that had been dormant since Earth's earliest days. Spiral Deep stirred from its slumber, its ancient mechanisms detecting what humanity's most advanced sensors could not. A primordial spiral configuration had activated within a human host. The refugee camp in Sanctuary Basin processed survivors with mechanical efficiency. Jax stood in line with hundreds of others, advancing slowly toward registration stations where identities were verified and living assignments made. Electronic tags were affixed to each person's wrist, containing medical information and location tracking. "Name?" asked the tired administrator when Jax reached the front. "Jax Carter." The woman's fingers paused over her console. "Carter. Any relation to Doctors Eliza and Michael Carter from the Coastal Research Division?" Jax nodded. "My parents." Her expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry for your loss. Their work was important." She tapped a series of commands. "You've been flagged for special accommodation report to Medical Station Helios. After processing." Special accommodation. His parents' research must have carried more weight than he'd realized, or perhaps someone had noticed his unusual physical responses and wanted to investigate. A sudden commotion at the camp entrance drew everyone's attention. A group of military personnel created a path through the crowd, surrounding several figures who moved with unmistakable authority despite obvious exhaustion. Commander Gale Arden had returned from battle with the surviving members of Stormhawk Squadron and Iron Vein Division 2. Hyperbody cultivators supported wounded comrades, while medical staff from Phoenix Medical Corps rushed forward with emergency equipment. Even in his devastated state, Gale's presence commanded respect. Stormpiercer, dulled and dormant after the extended conflict, had to be carried by an aide. Gale himself was too weakened to bear its weight. Thin lines of blood leaked from the commander's ears, and the corners of his eyes, evidence of severe internal damage from executing Stormcore implosion against a realm-superior opponent. His right arm hung limp, the microfractures visible even through his uniform. Employing a killing move to fight across realms exacted a terrible physical toll, yet his bearing remained that of someone who had transcended normal human limitations. A cultivator who'd pushed Hyperbody to its absolute breaking point and survived. Jax watched as medical staff guided Gale toward a restricted area. Their eyes met briefly across the crowd, a fraction of a second that shouldn't have registered. Yet Jax felt something pass between them, a recognition he couldn't explain. The commander's step faltered. He turned back, scanning the crowd until he found Jax again. His brow furrowed slightly before an aide urged him forward, breaking the connection. "Keep moving," ordered a security officer, gesturing for Jax to continue through processing. At Medical Station Helios, Jax expected questioning about his parents' research. Instead, he was subjected to a series of unexplained scans devices passed over his body, while technicians monitored readings without comment. "What are you looking for?" Jax finally asked as a third machine hummed over his chest. The technician, a young woman with cybernetic enhancements visible at her temples, glanced at her display. "Anomalous energy signatures, standard procedure for anyone exposed to abyssal proximity. Are you finding any?" She hesitated. "There's some unusual thermal activity in your spinal column, but it's within acceptable parameters." Jax knew she was withholding information. The machine had beeped in a pattern that clearly indicated an irregular finding. But before he could press further, the examination ended, and he was directed to his assigned quarters, a small but private room, unlike the communal spaces most refugees received. Night fell over the camp, casting shadows across temporary structures and the haunted faces of survivors. Jax lay on his narrow bed, unable to sleep. The day's events replayed in his mind: the battle, the collapse, the strange pain in his spine. Gale Arden's recognition. A soft vibration passed through the floor, so subtle that most would attribute it to distant machinery or passing transports. But Jax felt its true source. It came from below, from deep within the earth. Rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. He placed his palm against the cool floor, and the sensation intensified. Heat bloomed in his chest, spreading outward along channels he'd never been conscious of before. For a brief moment, something within him responded to the distant call, a dormant system awakening kilometers beneath the surface. Spiral deep, pulsed with renewed energy. Ancient chambers that had lain dormant for millennia began a slow reactivation sequence. Stone pathways illuminated with soft blue light, revealing intricate carvings of spiraling patterns identical to those found in cultivators across the universe. In the deepest chamber, a figure stirred within a crystalline structure, not awakening fully, but shifting in response to a signal it had been waiting for. The secret heart of Earth had begun to beat again, calling to the one human who carried a primordial spiral. The connection lasted only seconds before fading. Jax sat up, his heart-racing body covered in cold sweat. What he'd felt wasn't a hallucination or stress response, it was real. Something below the surface was calling to him. Deep underground, the ancient structure's light dimmed, but didn't extinguish entirely. It would wait. The final piece had returned to Earth after countless ages. The awakening had begun.